Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, none of that. Today, I want to talk to you about how to read more. So one of the questions I get all the time in comments is, how do you manage to read so much? So I read a lot of books. We are very near to the end of 2022 and I have read 300 books so far this year. So I get through a lot of books, and 2022 has been my most productive year reading wise as well. So I've got through more books in 2022 than in any previous year. I did make a video like this at the start of this year where I gave some tips for reading more quickly. I've kind of evolved my thinking a little bit on that since then, so I wanted to do a new version of the video that reflects those new thoughts, because there's one thing in particular that I've changed my opinion on since I last made this video. So what I'm going to talk to you about in this video is really three groups of things which I think will help you read more. I think they'll help you read more quickly, but also to get the information you need out of the books and to enjoy the books that you're reading. So I'm going to talk to you about what to read, when to read, and how to read. But before we talk about that, the first thing you need to ask yourselves is, why do you want to read more? So if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you want to read more books, you want to read more quickly. But you need to figure out why you want that. And if it's to get more pleasure out of books, if it's to enjoy reading more, then I think this video will help you. If it is purely to hit a target, then I'm not sure this video will help you. So I think that question of why is really important. So I need to read a lot of books. It's important to me to read a lot of books, partly because of the channel. So reading, has always been a central hobby of mine. But over the last 18 months or so, since I started this channel, it's become even more important to me, because making videos, talking to you is another hobby that I really enjoy, and in order to do that in an informed way, I feel like I need to read as many books as possible. So I try to read in my central genres, crime and horror, but I try to read more widely as well, so I can have more informed discussions with all of you about the books I'm reading. So that for me is a really good reason to want to read a lot of books. A, I get a lot of pleasure out of it, and B, it helps make the channel better. So as I say, you need to think yourselves about why you want to read more. And if you want to read more just so you've got bragging rights about how many books you've read, then I'm not sure that's a good motivation, and I'm not sure that going into a new year with that as a motivation to read more will actually help you read more. I think, for me, reading is a huge pleasure. It's such fun, and the more books I read, the more fun I have with them. So for me, having fun is why I want to read more. And I think if you go into it with that kind of attitude, you're much more likely to succeed in the quest to read more books. Right, so let me talk to you about the what, the when, and the how then. So first off, what should you read? So going back to what I just said, what you should read is books you think you're going to enjoy. There is nothing worse than reading a book that you're not enjoying, and particularly nothing worse than feeling you have to read a book. We all know, we've all had to read books for school that we didn't enjoy, and it's a horrible, horrible experience. But we can easily fall into that trap as readers of feeling like we need to read certain books. You see all these, videos about the 100 books you must read before you die and things like that, which, to be honest with you, are nonsense. Every reader will have different books that work for them, different books that they get something out of. And there may be some classics which, have a very broad appeal and lots of people really like, but that doesn't mean you're going to like them. And you shouldn't feel guilty if you don't like them. So if you want to read more, make sure you are choosing books you think you're going to enjoy. It sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but I think it's something that we often forget as readers, particularly as readers who are engaged with a kind of social platform like YouTube, where we're constantly being bombarded with suggestions of books we might want to read. So first rule is make sure you enjoy, you read things you're going to enjoy. And if you do want to read more widely, and I always support people who want to read more widely, who want to challenge themselves to read more difficult books or whatever. If you do want to do that, then think about the kinds of books you've enjoyed in the past and look for recommendations about, books that are slightly different but have some similarities to the things you enjoy. So there are so many books out there, even classics and things like that, that have elements of the kind of popular fiction that people enjoy nowadays that will mean they're more likely to enjoy those books. So do think about that. Do think about what you enjoy, and do ask for recommendations from people whose opinions you trust of other books you might enjoy, to help you broaden your horizons, and so you don't end up always reading the same authors and things like that. So rule number 1, read things you're going to enjoy. Obvious. Rule number 2 is when you should read. And I've got 2 tips for this, and they kind of feel like they conflict with each other. But for me, they really work as tips for being a productive reader. So those 2 things are, firstly, to try and make focused time for your reading. So I try and find time, particularly at the weekends, but also when I can during the week, when I can just sit for at least half an hour, preferably a bit longer than that, and solely focus on reading. So I make sure that any chores I've got to do are done. I make sure I've got a cup of tea and maybe a couple of biscuits. I make sure that I haven't got anyone popping around to the house or anything like that. That my family are occupied and have things that they're enjoying doing. And I can then sit and just focus on the book and really get into it. And the more you get into a book, the easier it is to read. When you first pick up a book again, or when you first start a book, you need to get yourself immersed in that book, don't you? So I always find the first few minutes of reading tend to be slower than the rest of the time I'm reading. So once you've gotten into the book and got into the rhythm of it again, you will read more quickly. So look for focus time when you can read. And the other really important thing is put your phone as far away from you as possible when you are doing that reading, because it is incredibly easy to be sitting there reading a book and think, I'll just check Facebook, I'll just check Twitter, and just pick up your phone and you end up doom scrolling, and you've wasted 5-10 minutes. So try and find focus time to read. The second thing is then, and this is the bit that completely contradicts what I've just said, is try and make the most of your downtime. So we all have time during the day when we have 5 minutes spare, when we're not doing something, we're waiting for something, we're waiting in a queue, or we are we're doing the washing up, or we're cooking or something like that. And those are times when you could be reading. And typically nowadays we tend to do other things with them. We tend to look at social media, to be honest with you. That's our default now for filling little spaces of time. But you could use them for reading. You could use them to listen to an audiobook. You could, if you're cooking, I quite often will read while I'm cooking. You typically only need one hand. If you're stirring a pot of something, you only need one hand. You can read with the other hand, or you can prop your Kindle up and read off your Kindle. So look for those moments of downtime and fill them with reading rather than with social media. The other important thing is to be respectful of your own time, and to think about, when you are spending that time reading, don't waste the time that you've got. So we will all have, even if we maximise the amount of time we've got in the day to read, we will all have a finite amount of time to read. And this goes back to the what as well, is don't persevere with books if you're not enjoying them. So if you started a book and it's a book you feel like you ought to read, but it's just not working for you, then be prepared to put it down and pick something else up. Because if you're not enjoying the book, you will read it more slowly, and you will resent it, and you won't take it in as much. Because I don't know about you, if I'm reading a book and not enjoying it, my mind wanders, and I have to go back a couple of pages every so often and figure out what was going on, because I've lost track. So be prepared to DNF books. Be prepared to put put books down, and be ruthless about that. Putting a book down and stopping reading it doesn't mean you're never going to read it. It just means that now isn't the right time for you in that book. And we all know in our heart of hearts if we're not enjoying a book. And quite often we will try to read it because we feel like we ought to. Because, it might be you're doing a buddy read with someone. It might be that, it's a classic and everyone's saying you should read it. It might be the next big thing. But don't force yourself to read books that you're not enjoying. Be respectful of your own reading time and protect that reading time from bad books. And by bad books, I don't necessarily mean bad books, but books you won't enjoy. Be prepared to put them aside and read something you will enjoy instead. And if you do that, you will read more books overall. Okay, the final set of tips then is about how to read. And there's a bit of overlap between these things. So how does cover, kind of DNFing as well. So being prepared to put books aside. But the other thing, and this is something that has I've found incredibly useful in terms of maximising my reading time, is using technology. So audiobooks are one thing, definitely. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of audiobooks. I don't typically get on with them. But I have found them really useful in the past when I've been when I used to have a long walk to work in the morning. I used to spend, 3/4 of an hour walking to work and walking back. And that was a great time for listening to audiobooks. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks at those times. So if you've got a long commute, if you have to drive to work or whatever, then, audiobooks are a great way of reading. But also think about eBooks. So I'm a huge fan of Kindles. I've got a few different Kindles lying around the house, and I read on Kindle a lot. But the wonderful thing about Kindle is that it magically synchronises in the cloud. So as well as having Kindle devices, I've got the Kindle app on my phone. And what that means is if I'm out shopping and there's an unexpectedly big queue and I'm stuck for 5 minutes queuing to pay for my shopping, I can get my phone out of my pocket, open up the Kindle app and carry on reading the book that I was reading on my Kindle at home. It will synchronise in the cloud, so you're always at the same place. And it's a great way of just filling up those moments of downtime by reading on your Kindle, by reading on your phone. And the other thing is you can also, if you buy the Kindle book and then buy the audio version of it as well, and often you can upgrade to the audio version quite cheaply if you've already got the Kindle book, it will synchronise across, reading it on your Kindle, reading it on your phone and listening to the audiobook. All of those things will synchronise. So you can read the same book in multiple different ways and get through it a lot more quickly. So think about that, think about that downtime. Think about the time when you are doing nothing, and think about how you can use technology to help you get more out of that downtime, to help you read when you would otherwise just be scrolling through Facebook or whatever. So I think devices and modern technology are a great way for us as readers to get more reading time crammed into a day. And then my other tip about how relates to this, and this is something I've changed my opinion on since I made this video last year. So previously I used to think that you should only read one book at a time. So I always found if I read one book at a time, I will get through books more quickly because you're focused on that particular book. You're not flipping between multiple books. I always find it astounding when I watch a video and someone will be reading 6 books at the same time. And I'll have 6 different books on the go. I find if I try and do that, I always end up taking longer to read those 6 books than I would have done if I read them one after the other, because I'm constantly having to context shift between the books and remember what was going on. So my rule used to be only read one book at a time. However, I have an exception to that rule now, which has really worked for me this year and has helped me read more. And that is, if the book I'm reading is a physical book, I will also have a Kindle book on the go. So, and I try and make that in a different genre, like a non-fiction book or a completely different type of book. So I never have that problem of getting slightly confused between the two. But if I'm reading a physical book, I will have a Kindle book on the go. And what that means is, when I go to bed at night, or if I wake up in the middle of the night, I can read on my Kindle without disturbing my wife. So I always read for 10 or 15 minutes before settling down at night. And also, if I do wake up in the night, I find reading for 10 minutes is the best way to kind of relax my brain again so that I can fall back to sleep again. But obviously I can't do that with a physical book because I'd have to put the light on. But also by having a Kindle book on the go, I can read it on my phone, so I can make use of that downtime. So if the book I'm reading happens to be a Kindle book anyway, I will only read that one book. But if I am reading a physical book, I will now always also read a Kindle book, so I can make sure I'm making the best use of free time that comes up randomly during the day. So those are my tips for being a more productive reader, for reading more and getting more enjoyment out of your reading. I honestly think if you do those things, you will find that you manage to read more than you have done in the past. We waste so much time nowadays getting sucked down social media black holes, which I think don't enrich our lives at all, in the same way that books can. And even trashy books can be a wonderful experience. In a way that watching TikTok videos of people doing silly dances or falling over isn't. That is not for me an enriching experience. It can be mildly entertaining and diverting, but I'd much rather read a book. So think about the time you are wasting during the day that you could be reading. Try and make dedicated reading time for yourself, and make sure the people around you know that you are dedicating that time to reading. That can be difficult if you've got a young family in particular. But if you set things up so that the other members of your family have things to be doing, then hopefully you can do that. Think about using devices. Think about the possibility of reading Kindle books on your phone if that's not something you do already. And also, most importantly, make sure that you read things you like. And if you do all of those things, as I say, I'm convinced that you'll be able to read more. So do try them out and let me know how you get on with them. Let me know in the comments what your own tips are for reading more quickly, for getting through more books in the year. But do think about that why as well. Think about why you are trying to do this. And if you're just trying to do it to hit a target, then think again, because reading shouldn't be about targets. Reading should be about fun. So I hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments your tips for reading more quickly. Let me know how you get on with my tips if you try them. And as always, hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.